Okay, welcome to episode 2 of the Rocket Science Podcast. In this episode, I was joined by Chris Scaplen, who is a coach for Triumph Strength and Performance. We talked about a couple different topics. We started off talking about programming in a sense to promote momentum and promote predictable progress block to block. So programming in a way to promote positive momentum in training. From there, we started talking about peaking blocks and how to write training blocks directly into meets and why that term might be a little bit overused or used in a way that's um, I guess not as it's not as special as maybe some people make it out to be. After that, we talked about tapering, how we kind of like to structure training to week or two into a meet. Do we prefer to train into the meet? Do we prefer to add a week onto the end of a block and into a full taper week? And what that looks like for different kinds of lifters, different lifter demographics, and how to kind of set that up based on past lifter data and just tangible data you have on a client. And then to finish things off, we talked about cutting briefly and why maybe we prefer the gut cut and pros and cons to gut cutting. So if you enjoy this episode, leave a like, leave a comment down below. You can find us again on both YouTube and Spotify. And all of Chris's information is going to be in the description, all of his links. So make sure you check him out. All right, how are we doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Good, good. So I think first off, first topic I kind of wanted to get into was talking about. I think you had an info post on this a little while back. It might have been you or Devin, but talking about programming in a way to build training momentum. So talking about load caps, that sort of deal, and really setting someone's training up to build momentum block to block and just kind of stack chips and stack wins. Session to session, week to week, block to block. Is there anything specifically that comes to mind like with that topic to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think that was. Well, no, I made the post, but I can't remember if it was a collab post or not. But yeah, I mean, building momentum kind of just centers around not pushing all your chips to the center of the table at the end of every single block, because
Hmm.
that's going to kill your momentum. Right, you're not going to be able to build off of that. So I think the main thing with momentum in general and trying to build block into block into block into block is just maybe either not ending on these RPE 10 top sets to where you can't build anything into the next block, or shifting the focus away from maybe that like primary day top set and into more of like your rep sets and things like that, and trying to build a base before pushing the top end, because we can really only push that top end in terms of like hitting PRs on top sets for a certain span of time. So we're not going to hit a 5 kilo squat PR on a single every block for a year, right? So we kind of need to build into that. So it's about maybe shifting priority or shifting intensity when those PRs aren't there.
Yeah. I actually had this conversation with an athlete a couple weeks ago, and he's kind of hit this bout of squat progress where, we've gone from the point where like, we've probably, realistically, if we moved into singles, we could probably tack on like 30 pounds for his squat PR. But I was explaining to him like, and he really was like wanting to exceed his ranges at the end of the block, exceed his load caps and whatever, because he could probably hit them, right? Like he probably wouldn't have missed. But what I was explaining to him, I was like, okay, well, we're coming up on a meet. We have a meet in September. We're coming up on that. We need to kind of pace things in a way to set ourselves up for that meet. Um, so, right now we were running triples, now we're running doubles, and then we'll be running a couple blocks of singles into the meet. And the thought process was, okay, we can take a 15-pound triple PR, like 15 pounds over your best, triple that you hit probably 3 or 4 months ago. We can come back, do the same thing on doubles, save juice in the tank on both blocks, maybe save 5 kilos, 7 kilos maybe, and then come in, hit singles, save 5 or 7 kilos on the singles block, and then really push it for the final block. And that's where we kind of look to maybe empty the tank. So yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing is using like utilizing load caps and saving juice across the block or at the end of each block, like you said, where it doesn't hurt to take a 5 or 10 pound PR and do that every single block. Across different rep ranges. Obviously, you can't add 5 pounds to your best single every block, but maybe. But running a block of triples and taking a 5 or 10 pound PR, then running a block of doubles, 5 or 10 pound PR, I think is really huge. Do you do anything with um like cycling rep ranges specifically for momentum's sake?
100%, yeah. And the reasons can kind of vary, right? Because if we're cycling through rep ranges, we're probably going to be taking some amount of weight off of the bar, so the stress induced from those top sets is going to change. Um, and likely if we're pushing to like an RPE 9 single, a lot of people are that's going to kind of run them into the ground at some point. So there's like that the actual physiological aspect of just not pushing that top end intensity for so long. But I think the bigger one is just the mental aspect of like being able to, like you said, like chip a PR on a triple, and then chip a PR on a double, and then chip a PR on a single, to where we are able to like kind of build and hit bigger numbers than we've hit before. But that's kind of just by way of cycling through these rep ranges. So it's really like we need to make this amount of progress in a span of 3 blocks or 6 blocks. If we go like triple, triple, double, double, single, single, rather than like every single block when we have the same rep set or same single on the top set for the primary day. So I think, like you said, yeah, I think it's a mental benefit a lot of times with the cycling rep ranges over even a physical one.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, I even do that a lot with like secondary days. If I find a secondary day that really like, I like to use squat as the example because I think it's usually most people will squat twice a week. Typically, there's some 3 times a week, but usually we're not periodizing that third day. Of that secondary day, let's say someone does like a top set of 5 and then back off 6s. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll even, go from top set of 5 to top set of 4 and just flip them back and forth.
Mhm.
And then, if the opportunity is there, we can, PR and throw 5 or 10 pounds on that each time we come back to that rep range. Usually I'm looking for like 5 pound or 2.5 kilo PRs generally. Kind of depends on the person's strength levels and whatnot. But I like to do that a lot too. I think there's a big mental benefit of being able to come in and each week, take, if it's a week 1 and last time you started squats on the week 1, for a set of 5 or whatever, you take 200 kilos. Maybe this time you take 202 or 205.
Mhm.
And we're stacking, there's more volume over across, from the last time we ran that block, but, we're going to finish with that PR usually. And it's a big confidence booster. So I usually like to do that. I'll do that a lot with like primary bench days too. I personally like a big fatigue single fan, and like almost the number one way I periodize it for everyone is I'll do like a triple and then a single, if they're running fatigue singles. And then the next block I'll do double and single. And I just go back and forth between triple and double. And I think it just keeps it fresh. I mean, there's a lot of times where like sure you could say a top, this specific rep set is best. But like when we run it over and over and over and over again, it is going to get mentally stale. I think there's a huge benefit of uh flipping rep ranges around across multiple days throughout the micro, but also for accessories too. I do that a lot on accessories as well. So I don't know if you've seen that as well, where you know, I mean, this kind of gets into a bit of periodization, but do you ever find you're just kind of flipping back and forth between the exact same rep ranges, like on a specific day, maybe?
Yeah, similar to what you said on like on a secondary, depending on how someone's going to respond to a secondary, how much we want to, if they respond well to that, kind of ramp into a lower rep range to feed into
Mhm.
the primary. But like you were saying, where the top set can get kind of stale if you're not able to build momentum. Like I'd find with benchers that I don't know, smaller benchers, right? Like lightweight female benchers, or just people who just don't have a ton of weight on the bar. Like you usually want to keep that bench single in, just because it's not super, physically fatiguing, and you're getting the skill practice of having, the competition movement in there being a heavy single. So you don't want to like just like shift outside of that and take triples when you don't really need to for the fatigue sake. Um, but those are usually cases where you need to go like several blocks without hitting like a tangible PR, like a 1 rep max PR. So that's when you think you need to shift the focus from just completely away from the top set and treat it as a kind of, okay, this is just for skill practice. This is just so we can get a heavy ish movement in, and so you can feel the weight. But then we're gonna focus on hitting PRs on your on your sevens, on your dips, on your accessory work, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I have some people where I'll leave singles in for, very long time on bench, and I'll even tell people like, okay, I know the singles first. I know it's the heaviest set of the day. But maybe the RPE is not, maybe the RPE gets like 8, but maybe we're pushing like the top triple or top set of 4, set of 5 after that, to like an RP 9 or whatever the case, RP
Mhm.
10 even. So I'll a lot of times tell people, like I try to explain that in block overview videos, like, hey, I know the single's the heaviest set of the day, but this is the highest intensity set. This is the one we're going the hardest on. This is the one I care that is really progressing. The single is just like an indicator hanging along. That's usually a time where I probably would throw in like a fatigue single approach. Um,
Yeah. That's another reason I like the fatigue singles, is because it kind of just straight up tells them like this is not
yeah.
the priority. Like your priority is the stuff that comes first. We want to do that fresh. This is just
Mhm.
for this other reason.
Yeah. I think that obviously there's, a lot of info on fatigue singles now and whatnot, but I think that's one thing where just ordering it like that, like triple than single or, four than single or whatever the case is, the athlete's going to see that and it kind of puts it in their mind like, okay, the set of horse first, that might be the same RPE or even higher than the single. That's what we're pushing or whatever. Um, block to block, then do you do a lot of like load caps and ranges, or what does that look like? Are you letting things be a little more open-ended for the athlete with like RPs or whatnot?
I like it to be as open ended as we can manage. Most of the things that I'm going to program are RP, right? I kind of the percentage work is usually for the lower priority days that aren't really hitting an RPE, and we want to kind of manage intensity as much as we can. But for the most part, everything is going to be RPE and auto regulated. So I want to leave it up to the athlete as much as possible. But I think a lot of times we do need ranges. So I find myself on pretty much across the board on primary, your primary days top set for squat, bench, and deadlift. I'm pretty much always going to have a range for that. But outside of that, it's just kind of on a person to person basis with how comfortable they are with rating RPE. But the goal is to always to shift into being able to feel out how strong you are on the day and be able to pick your own ways.
Do you find that this goes a little off topic, but do you find that I've had this conversation with a friend of mine in the gym, and I write a lot of RPE based programming, right? But I've really gotten into, I used to not be as much into ranges, but I range a lot of stuff now. And I think it's much easier kind of as I've gotten better with predictability. Like there's some athletes where I can predict their training the entire block and I can tell you exactly what weight they're going to take. Now there's some,
Mm.
there's a lot of that also has to do with the fact that the athlete might be really good with their outside variables and whatnot. But I had this conversation in the gym. I was like, sometimes I don't even care what the RP is. Like I feel like I write the RP, but the RP doesn't really matter. Like I more so am looking at like the load and like if we have a week that like maybe the RP is overshot, but it's still within the range. And maybe I understand, okay, that's a little bit of a fluky day. There's outside variables going on. Like I know we're still on pace to kind of finish where we want. But I've kind of started to like I was even thinking about this. I was thinking like I could probably write a training block with just ranges for the top set and no RPE, and I think I would get a very similar outcome with a lot of people. I don't know if you're like that at all, or if your
I
ranges are a little more open-ended or what, but
So it's person to person. I think I pretty much 100% agree with what you were saying. How it's the people that you've been working with for a while, because those people you kind of know exactly how things are going to pace throughout a block, and say you need to take 550 for your deadlift single on week 3 in order for that 580 whatever
Mhm.
to come in strong. It's like not really about reps and reserve at that point. It's just like you kind of need that in your hands to be strong. But if I have someone who I've been working with for a few blocks, it's like I would rather defer to the RPE. But um, with I think especially with people who take these big jumps week to week, like a lot of like the heavier weight guys, where say you're ending on a six whatever deadlift and you're starting on like a 485 500-pound single. It's like you can't rate that on an RP. You probably have like 10 reps in the tank. So especially for the early weeks in the block, I think it's even more so the just like strictly ranges, because it's like we just need you to take this weight, this weight, this weight, and then the RP is kind of for the end of the block where we're hitting the heavy stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Eric has said this before where a lot of times where earlier in the block the RP is maybe not the priority, but then at the end of the block it's like, okay, now we're gonna push to this true 8 or true 9 or whatever the case is. Um,
Mm.
which is kind of what you're referring to, right? Like I'm sure you're not, I mean, maybe you are. Are you writing like a 2 RPE on week 1, or is it, looking like 5 RPE, but the range is there?
To be honest, if I have someone who's taking like those massive jumps where the early in the block stuff is really low RP, I'll just put a weight. I'm not going to put an RP.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I think Eric was the one who brought that up, and that really kind of opened my eyes. Obviously, we've seen guys like Steve Denovi and Marcellus have talked about it too with the ranges, but that's been a game changer for me. I think over these last like 6 months is I've really utilized ranges more. I used to be very open-ended, would write the RPE occasionally throughout the block. I would throw caps or ranges in, but yeah, I've been a very big fan of kind of ranging things out, pre-planning blocks best I can. Obviously, when I'm with new athletes, it's pretty hard to do.
Mhm.
Usually in that case, I'm writing 1 week at a time. Um, do you ever find, this goes a little bit off topic as well, but do you ever find that Do you ever have people where you don't range an entire block for like psychological reasons with someone?
Yeah. It usually, like, I'd say as close to 100% of the time as you can get. I'm writing ranges for all the primary day top sets, but there are cases where um, someone is maybe relying on it too heavily, and maybe like we've made some assumptions about weight progression that just aren't correct, and that we've kind of fallen into this pattern that's just like not working. So it's like, okay, let me just take away the weight ranges entirely. Let me take away my bias, and you just go in and completely auto regulate and take what you feel is matching the RPE, and then we'll kind of build a new baseline to make some assumptions from. That's been the case for a few people for sure, but yeah, usually I'm putting ranges just because I want some kind of guidance there, and some kind of I don't know, leash, for lack of a better word. But sometimes for sure you gotta let them pick their own weight sometimes.
Yeah. I have an example where I had someone who I probably was a little too aggressive with his load selections as well. Like my ranges I was writing were too aggressive, as well as like I think he just got in his head about, oh, I need to hit this at the end of the block. So to do that, I need this. And to do that, I need this on week 2 and I need this on week 1 to make it
Mm-hmm.
realistic. And this so far, I mean, we're 2 weeks into this block, but we've taken very like more conservative approach, but as well as I've only written like I write, his week 1, and then when I see Monday, I determine, okay, what are we kind of going to look to hit next week on week 2's Monday, and I'll see Tuesday session. I planned week 2, Tuesday, and so far it's been very good. I mean, we've definitely had probably the best looking baseline we've probably ever had, and we're getting ready for a meet right now. So the biggest thing is we're kind of looking to push these last 2 weeks hard. But I think from a psychological benefit is he doesn't know what my plan is at the end of the block. Like I have it in my head,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't really know for sure what we're taking. And I kind of just told him, hey, like we're gonna base a lot of it off your performance. If you have a very high performing week 2, we could probably look to have a very high performing week 3, versus if week 2's a little flat, we may just take a more conservative week 3 approach and try to set up for a better week 4 or whatnot. So yeah, I definitely had some people where I'll write the ranges across, 1 week at a time. Do you have anybody who you write just 1 week of training at a time, like a complete week, the whole microcycle and everything? Or do you just basically plan blocks, the whole block?
Usually it's block to block. I prefer doing block to block. I think it's easier to analyze once you kind of have, because you can always go in and make changes. I think people are like, oh, so someone made a post one time where it's like writing it one block at a time or a whole block at a time is lazy, because like now you're not going to go in and make changes week to week. I don't know. You can still go in mid block and change things. It's just easier to kind of have the whole thing laid out, at least in my opinion. But usually when we are going week to week, it means that something is off, and we need to just kind of take each session as it comes, rather than making any expectations for how we're going to lay things out for the next few weeks. So it's either pain related. Sometimes we'll just program like one session at a time if pain is that variable. Usually when I'm starting with a new client, I'll go 1 week at a time, just because I kind of want to. I don't really want to. You got to make some assumptions, obviously, when you're starting with a new client, but I don't want to rely on too much. Making too many guesses. So I'll kind of make the assumptions that I'm going to make in my head, and then just go week to week and see what happens. But usually, yeah, I people that I've been working with for a reasonable amount of time are getting an entire block at a time. The only time I'm writing 1 week is when something is not going how we want it to.
Yeah, I'm the same
Or
way. I always write training um, as a block, block at a time. Pain's the number one thing that comes to my mind when, maybe you kind of heavily pivot what you were planning on doing and start just writing, a day at a time. But yeah, I do remember that post. Someone did put that up, and then it was kind of a big thing for a few days where people were talking about it. But there are some coaches out there who do write 1 week at a time. I don't know if anyone in our group chat does or not, but
yeah, I don't think so. My coach does. I get 1 week of training at a time. Kelly does
yeah,
that.
yeah. Some coaches prefer it. I know
Yeah,
Dungy writes 1 week at a time. I believe he's the only person I know personally who writes 1 week at a time. So
yeah.
uh,
I think it's just a systems thing. Like it's just
mhm.
whatever makes more sense in your head is easier to analyze.
Yeah, yeah. I think the benefits to that would be one, it kind of almost like not holds the coach accountable, but it does force the coach to look at your programming every single week. So I think that
Yeah.
there's a benefit to that, as well as then I think some of it too with the psychological benefit for the athlete is the athlete can't see, they might not be able to see the end goal, which might be better for some people versus, some people I think do probably benefit from being able to see what the game plan is long term and knowing there is a plan in motion, I guess, and not to overshoot early or push things too early. But I guess that's probably a good stopping point for the first topic. Next thing I want to talk about was going into like meet preps. I feel like peaking blocks are talked about as if they're this special magical, you know, period of
Mhm.
training to get ready for a meet. I personally don't believe that. I actually like am very like my meet preps I write for clients look very similar to off season, off season training. The way I always think about it is there's not really an off season. Um, but I was curious what you think of that, right? The biggest thing for me is I usually will phase things into pushing singles on the top set, but that's pretty much about it. I don't know if there's anything special you do within your system that you're looking to um, do when getting clients ready for meets, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of what you said. I don't know that a peaking block really exists within my system of programming, because the goal, I guess there's caveats to that. Like we're not going to be prioritizing top end strength all of the time, right? We don't need to be strong on singles year round. But a lot of times that's just the matter of just putting a single back into a program, right? Like the bones of the program is usually going to be pretty consistent year round, and the goal is always to just get stronger. The only thing that shifts is I guess your ability to express top end when you get closer to a meet. So um, in terms of obviously, I think for the most part we're all away from going to from eights to sixes to triples to singles and cycling
Mhm.
back out once you get into a meet prep or out of a meet prep. But no, I think it's just about finding a week of training that gets your primary strong, get you a block of training that gets the primary stronger throughout the block, running that end on end and getting stronger. And then if you need to move away from the heavy stuff when you're away from a meet because of fatigue reasons, then you just cycle back in once you're closer to a meet, and then push the heavy stuff then. So no, I don't really have a specific peaking protocol that I follow for athletes.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I like the way you put it, where you said find a week of training that makes the primary strong, and we find a block of training that makes the primary strong across multiple weeks. That's a
Mhm.
really good way to put it. I think like to me, that's probably the number one goal I have when writing like, block of training is I'm trying to get, the one primary session of the week for all the lifts to feel good, and then trying to get that last heavy primary session for each lift to feel good. Um, yeah, the biggest things I'm doing usually into meets is if, for whatever reason we're not already hitting singles in training, let's say like I'm with, working with the lifter and their squat, maybe we cycle between triples, doubles, singles as an example on the primary day. Usually into the meet, right, we're going to swing into singles at some point in that final block, maybe final two blocks. Just kind of depends. Again, I think a lot of that, I'm a big fan of like being able to call audibles with that, where I don't really have a pre-planned, like sometimes I'll have a pre-planned destination of, okay, in three blocks, we're going to move into singles. But if momentum's there and maybe like we, push a block of triples or whatever, and we know, okay, maybe there's, 10 more kilos in the tank or 7 more kilos in the tank, we'll go back, rerun triples. So like I had a lifter who we did a block of singles. He signed up for the meet. We kind of exhausted where the top end was. We were like 9 weeks out, and it kind of it didn't really make sense to run, two more blocks of singles after just running two blocks of singles, running 4 or 5 months of singles straight. So we just went into doubles, ran a block of doubles, and then went back into singles. Now we're in a block of singles. But generally I usually try to have people like two blocks of like really pushing that top end if they're able to handle it. Usually, I feel like people can typically handle something like that where we, work up to something fairly heavy like an RP 8 to end, the first block, then, maybe we pull back and work up to like an RP 9 or so to end prep off at that week out mark or line things up with the meet day. But yeah, usually the biggest things I'm doing is just making sure singles are usually in the program. Everything else, secondary days, back downs on the primary, like pretty much everything else looks the same because again, we know what makes someone strong. We know what's working, so we're just kind of keep running that. Have you ever ran into a situation? I think they were talking about this in the group chat the other day. Ran into a situation where you just didn't use singles at all into a meet, like didn't hit any singles.
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I know that's kind of becoming a thing. I know Matt Cronin, his I think his latest powerlifting now video is about that, and I know one of his clients personally that ran I think it was triples on deadlifts all the way into the meet. I think he had like a single on his taper week, and then that was it. And his deadlift came in like stronger than it ever has. But no, I know I haven't seen that too much, but it's something to I guess experiment with now that I know it's more of an option.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I've never ran into that issue yet, but like it definitely makes sense, right? Like someone was saying, I think they were saying they would run like maybe it was Alex. I don't remember. But they were running like a block of triples or something or a set of four on the primary day or whatever. And then at the end, they just hit a single on their last primary day to get a good
Mm,
idea of where of that block, like maybe 6 weeks out. They hit a single just to get a good idea of where that was in comparison to their set of four or whatever. And then into the meet, they ran the fours or whatever the case was. And then on meet day, they hit a single and they hit a massive meet PR because they had that data knowing, okay, if we hit 220 for four at eight, we kind of know roughly this is their range for a single at eight. And then coming in, maybe they finish the block like 225 or whatever, and they know roughly where that range is for their single on meet day. And then it's at that point, it's just about, being really good with your attempt selection on the day and I guess seeing what that second looks like to make the right call for the third. Um,
mhm.
but yeah, I never ran into the issue of not running singles. I don't even know if I've ever really ran into an issue of giving someone singles and then training fizzles. I know that's becoming common too. But yeah, have you ever ran into something where you give someone singles and you're like, okay, that's just, we give them singles and their training just kind of goes to shit after, you know, one block or so, two blocks, whatever.
Yeah, I've definitely seen people only be able to handle singles for a certain period of time, and sometimes that time is less than a block, right? So maybe we'll like run triples for this amount of time, and then we go like, well, we could change the rep set mid block. We go 3-2-1-1 or something like that. But I have never really ran into the case where it's just like Matt Cronin's client Dylan Steffen. He's who I was talking about earlier, where he is hitting like I don't want to get it wrong, but like maybe pulling 270 for like a set of four, and then they'll like cycle into singles, and that top end just immediately goes away. And then he didn't pull any singles into his meet prep, and I think he pulled like 285 or something like that. I haven't seen a case like that where it's just like the second we put singles in, push it for more than a week, it's just like top end linear regression.
Hmm.
But I guess I don't know. It's not really. Maybe I've just had a biased kind of way of viewing things, and I didn't notice it before. But it's something to look at. I haven't noticed it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same. I've never really noticed where it's like, we throw the singles in, but I think it's some of it's with my system where, like I said, I keep everything else constant. So like, if we're running a triple on the primary day for the top set and then we run, back down sets of five, like if I'm gonna swing into singles, I'm just gonna run a single and back down sets of five, like or maybe four, whatever, right? But I'm not gonna pull everything down. So I think that's, maybe why we probably don't see that as much. I'm assuming you're similar where you're not drastically swinging rep ranges down. Um, but yeah, I never ran into that issue. Um, do you have anything else you want to add specifically about like peaking blocks? Let's actually talk about this. I think this has become more common is training right into a meet, like straight into the meet, no taper week or very minimal taper week. How often do you find like you do that, I guess, going into a meet?
So ideally, that's the goal, kind of, right? The goal is to find a way where we're like, okay, on week 4 or week 5 or however long your block is, that is the strongest day or the strongest week, and it's the strongest on all three. We know that you're going to peak on this week, and we know how to make those days strong. So it's just a matter of organizing it so you're strong on that one day, and we don't need to have this like extra week to reduce fatigue. Um, I think you need a good bit of training data on someone to be that confident in writing a block that way. So I think it's dependent on how long. For me, it's dependent on how long I've worked with somebody, how confident I am, kind of training into the meet that way. Because I think usually it's I don't know about a safer bet, but it's the more practiced approach historically to just like have that. So you're running a 4-week block to run 4 weeks and then extra back end taper week, pull back fatigue, and then peak on that, meet day. But if we're going with the approach of like I was saying earlier, like we want to make a microcycle that causes your primary on each lift to be strong. We're going to pace through a block so that you're the strongest at the end of it, and then we're going to string blocks together that yield progress on that end of block each time. There's no reason that we'd want to change that block structure once we're in a meet, right? We just want to have those strong days land on meet day and then pull back the fatigue that's not super necessary to that short term top end.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually have not ran into a situation where I've I guess like trained someone directly into the meet, like with no additional like taper week. And we'll talk about tapers towards the end of this, but I've always tapered people. Now I do see why you would train into it. I've just never really ran into a situation where I feel like it would be like, because like you said, you feel like it's maybe the safer, you said you felt like it was more the safer bet.
I'd say the I guess the more traditional like plus taper week is
Mhm.
just what people have done more, so
Yeah.
it's a little bit more like familiar.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I guess that's how I am. I've never ran into I guess having a person where I felt like it would be better to train directly into the meet, but I definitely see why we would do that. I think bench press is the big one because with bench, if you have like a primary bench day on a Saturday or whatever, and you're competing on a Saturday, like then it makes it super easy, like to just train right in. Or if you have a primary squat day on a Friday or Saturday very close to the meet, like it's pretty easy to just train right in. Yeah, I definitely want to do that. Like I want to run into a situation where I would need it. I think the biggest thing that's kind of shied me away from it is I don't usually stack primary days on each other aside from like bench and deadlift or bench and squat, but like usually I'm not getting all three on one day or even all
Mhm.
three like on a Friday and Saturday. So I feel like it would be very kind of awkward to kind of get deadlift to show up um or squat to show up. Now I feel like you could probably get away with it if primary squat on Fridays, primary bench on Saturday, or primary squat on and bench on Saturday, and then deadlift was earlier in the week because usually deadlift you can kind of get away with some different things that final week of the meet with less training and whatnot. So you could kind of really change your micro up, especially for like conventional pullers and that sort of thing. But yeah, I have not ran into that issue yet. The way I always think about it though is there's kind of like three options to really like build the peaking block or build that the training is um you have your traditional plus one taper week. So if you run 4 week blocks, you run a 5 week block into the meet, and the fifth week's the taper. Um, or you train directly into it where the you run 4 week blocks, the fourth week is meet week, or you train bench right in. So maybe you're adding a week of bench or whatever, but you're tapering back squat and deadlift. Do you feel like you sometimes maybe kind of do the mixture version with some people where you are, maybe training bench directly into the meet, but squat and deadlift or, getting the plus one taper week?
Sure, yeah. I mean, bench is gonna usually require less of a taper anyway.
Mhm.
In my experience, at least, it's usually just a case of taking away a couple accessories on that, the back end of meet week, and then maybe cutting some volume on the back end of meet week. But usually, squat and deadlift are going to be a more involved taper anyway. So bench, I'd say, unless you're like a super, long range of motion bencher that really carries that pressing fatigue, then bench we're usually just going to train straight in anyway.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm the same way. I'll even like I will program things that are like with the plus one taper week where 4 week block, fifth week taper, and I'll taper bench, but the bench taper is like, okay, we're gonna, if we ended the block on like Monday's bench session, let's say someone benches Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and just as a very general example, maybe the Monday session ends at an RP8 to finish the block. The Wednesday session ends at like an RP7. The Friday session or Saturday session, whatever the case is, we'll just say Saturday ends at like an RP 9.5 or whatever, right? The week of the meet, maybe I just go, Monday sessions 1 RP less, so like a 7, just again, very general example. There's a lot more nuance to it than that. And then maybe the middle sessions like peeled back like a half RPE. And then I'll usually just pull like one set out of the Wednesday session and that's it. Like it's 1, 2 sets across the week, just pulled backs from like the very peak end intensity. What I always try to usually like compare it to is it's more like week 3 type intensities. Generally, it's just a little less intensity than like that really heavy week. Um, volumes just peeled off. Like you said, you peel it off at the end of the week. I'm the same way. Usually the last bench session gets some volume pulled out. If someone's doing a lot of bench volume, maybe I'll pull like one set out early in the week, but generally it's
Mhm.
just like 1 or 2 sets the last bench session. And then like you said, accessories, which I think you just had a really good post on pulling out accessories during your taper, like as an example, like a row versus like a belt squat, right? Where maybe you're keeping in something like a belt squat because that stimulus is super um I guess like beneficial to providing strength even in the short term versus like something like a row, right? It's just additional fatigue that's not driving the top end. Um so we could get into that with exercise selection as well if you want to. Is there anything
Mhm.
specifically, I guess, I mean, we can just kind of cover your post a little bit with certain
Sure.
exercises like you are more likely to keep in versus pull out.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the whole kind of point of that post was kind of what is the point of the exercise, and is it important to like you being strong right now, right? Like you doing tricep extensions 2 days before a bench session it's not gonna put any muscle on your body for that next bench session to make you stronger. But having those tricep extensions in twice a week, every week for a year is going to help you get stronger. But when we're right next to a meet, it's like those tricep extensions probably aren't going to be doing anything to drive the top end in the short term. So those probably don't need to be in there. But then you take a high frequency bencher who say they bench 4 or 5 times a week and they bench the day before they compete, and or sorry, the day before their primary day, and it's a couple of light sets at whatever percentage, and it's not carrying any fatigue. Like you're not feeling that tomorrow. It's just kind of like getting the motion in, so your primary comes in sharper. That's not something that we really want to take in because that's not a long term benefit anyway. That's just in there for the reason of making that day strong. So if you can kind of look at each exercise on that sliding scale of, is this important for like long-term development or your short-term this week, tomorrow, whatever strength, then it kind of helps you decide when something needs to come out, if it needs to come out, and to what extent you need to pull back on it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think actually working with Devin's kind of opened my eyes up a little bit to this. I used to peel all, okay, I should preface this. I've been doing this for longer than working with Devin, but Devin's kind of turned me even more into the extreme of keeping stuff in. So when I really started coaching powerlifting, I used to peel every accessory out. So the last heavy week of prep, I would like pretty much slash all accessories, maybe pull more of the rows and the less specific stuff out. And then the week of the meet, I would almost do no accessories, maybe like, something like a belt squat or a, chest press or something early. If it was early in the week, leave it in. But then I started phasing into more, okay, I'm gonna leave the more specific stuff in. But when I did this prep with Devin, um, we left a lot of stuff in. Like I was doing rows like on the Thursday before the meet, not heavy, but I was getting the movement in like a couple days before, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I've started doing that where I'll leave a lot of like, I mean, maybe on like a Thursday, 3 days out, I'm not having someone do some rows or something, but like on a Monday session, I might even leave some of like their non-specific accessories in because I think there is probably some, benefit to some extent, right, of leaving some additional movement in outside of just squat, bench, and deadlift. So like I've been on both sides of the extreme with that, where I've gone from no accessories the week of the meet to we're gonna not pull any of your belt squatting out because that really helps, and maybe we just pull a little bit of intensity out or something like that. So yeah, that was something that like working with Devin directly, I think really kind of opened my eyes up. In fact, even with my meet prep, we didn't even taper like my squat at all. Like I always do like a pause triple or double and then like a 3x6. We did the same pause double and 3x6 on the Wednesday before the meet, and it worked really well. So I would say even nowadays, I'm not even really, you know, pulling much volume out of even main lifts. Like I'll leave a lot of times, like with bench press, right? Because we kind of talked about bench press, but just to kind of swing back to bench press, there's a lot of times where I'll leave all their sets and reps in. And again, it's just intensity pulled out or like one set prior to, the day before the meet type of deal. If I feel like it won't interfere, if it's, far enough before the meet, not like directly before or not the day before. But yeah, that was something that I think working with Devin really opened my eyes and kind of, like I said, I've seen, I've worked on both ends of that as a coach. So um, I
Yeah,
guess,
with the accessory, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
With the accessory stuff, it's tough because like you were saying, you're doing rows a few days out, and it's like those rows making you stronger on squats? Like, not
Yeah.
really, but it's also contributing to that week of stress that you've been running that's been yielding progress. So it's not like we want to take away everything. If it's
Mhm.
just like, oh, you know, it's an accessory, so we don't need it in. It's like if you're doing tricep extensions or if you're doing, dips or whatever, that's still contributing to that total workload that
Mhm.
has been working. So it's not like we want to take everything out completely all the time. And like you said, with you didn't even taper squat going into the meet. You just like squatted how you were squatting. I think I made a it wasn't an info post on my feed. I just did like a few story posts on my client Anthony, who we had like a big swing on his deadlift where we started working together, and we just I made programming decisions that just went horrific. Like he pulled 573. That was his best pull, and then within like 3 blocks he had failed 523 on strength. Um, and then we had kind of like figured out what was going on, and he just like needed this really high intensity secondary to have that come in strong. And we swung from a 523 fail to a 601 deadlift within like 5 blocks. And then we competed, and it was like, well, I'm not going to pull back on this intensity that we know is driving things, even if we could have like a little pullback that might give you a little bit more strength. It's like we've had consistent progress, and we know that this is the reason that we've been having consistent progress. So we're just going to leave it in and play the safe game of being like, okay, we know how strong you typically are on Saturdays, so we'll just expect you to be that strong on Saturday. And that's when I think a case of just training directly into the meet is super helpful, because you're not even pulling back on anything anyway. You're just doing your week 4,
Mm.
how you normally do your week 4.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And like we said, I think that has become more common recently, with just training directly into the meet. Um, I guess lastly, I guess with taper weeks, do you ever find, because I have an info post or a YouTube video I'm planning on with a taper week, um, or writing taper weeks. And one of the big things that like I'm not sure how to really tackle is talking about schedule changes. Because me personally, I will slide the schedule a little bit here and there. Not like drastic, right? Like I'm not gonna just move squat days and bench days and deadlift days around just to move them, but like I'll slide everything. Let's say like someone's squatting on a Monday and Friday. Monday's the secondary day, Friday's the primary. Like I might slide it back and do their last squat day on Tuesday, the week of the meet, to kind of line things up, with like that 3 days of exposure timing. Do you ever feel like you do anything like that or add in days? There's occasionally times where it's like, okay, I don't want someone coming in on, you know, 4 days rest of squatting when they normally come in on two on their primary. So I'm going to throw a little filler day in of just like a, 3x1 or something that's super easy, just kind of fill the gap. Do you ever do anything like that with the week of the meet where you are making microcycle changes, I guess?
100%, yeah. Definitely gonna. I think it kind of goes to, if you're a higher frequency lifter, those exposure timings are probably a lot more important. If you're deadlifting once per week, no, I'm probably not going to move a ton. Maybe I'll throw in a day where there's like a couple of reps, just to maybe, so it's not like 11 days with you doing 0 deadlifts until the platform. But for the most part, if you're a lower frequency lifter, those exposure times become a little bit less important. But if you're squatting 3 times a week, I probably want them to be exactly the same as they've been in training. And like 2 weeks out is where we can probably start to look at like maybe shifting a day in the back into that first week, and then so we can line things up on the second week. But yeah, I think it's pretty dependent on frequency, or if you're just really sensitive to those times between exposures. Like if you're a 5 times per week bencher, and you have a primer session the day before, we're still going to do that primer session even if your, I don't know, meet day is on a day that you don't normally do your primary.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm the same where I usually just try to move things around. Like you said, bench is the big one. Do you find like you usually are programming the primary bench on Saturday usually for most people?
Pretty much always, unless we are. That's pretty much always my go-to. If I'm writing a first block, we are putting the primary bench on Saturday, and then we'll make changes to make the Saturday strong. The only reason I would pull a primary bench away from a Saturday is if like we see a day early in the week is coming in really strong. We've had trouble getting that primary to progress, and we're nowhere near a meet, so it's like there's no tapering issues. It's just like, okay, well, let's just take the day that we know is strong, make that the primary, and then get stronger. But since bench is usually going to require less of a taper, um, you kind of just want it to be on Saturday because you're doing that train into the meet strategy. So usually, yeah, we just want it to be as simple and simple as possible with the least amount of variables possible. That usually just means put it on Saturday.
Yeah, yeah, especially with that higher frequency. I think with, like you said, sometimes you'll find like maybe someone comes in on, a day far away from the meet where they just feel really strong. I think there's probably a benefit of just training like that anyways, because they're probably gonna have more productive training, knowing you might lose a couple kilos on the platform and being okay with that, like knowing that it is gonna be a bit more unpredictable on meet day. But if you can have a year of really productive training and then just have maybe one day where like, okay, we come in 2.5 or 5 kilos less than we would like, maybe that's something, maybe that's a worthwhile trade-off, or just kind of line things up, final block of the meet or into the meet or whatever, just for predictability's sake. But yeah, like you said, higher frequencies, you're going to want to see things line up generally more often with the meet. That's why everyone tends to write bench press um, on Saturdays nowadays. And I think there's also, like you said, training into the meet. A lot of times we'll see that more with bench press, or like, I was saying where I'll pull less workload out on bench where that taper is less drastic. And we kind of want things to line up just because the taper is less drastic versus, if we have a deadlift early in the week, like we're just pulling a bunch of workload out usually anyways, where it doesn't matter what day that is because the fatigue's low, the frequency's low. And even with the frequency, if let's say someone is pulling twice a week, there's a difference between 2 times a week squat and 2 times a week deadlift for some people, where some people that twice, second squat day is being pushed, it's pretty heavy. And a lot of times we're not pushing both deadlift days. I would say that's more rare. At least in my system, I like to think there's a bit of a difference in the kinds of primary and secondary days with those two lifts. With, in regards to then tapering, where we need to be more aggressive with deadlift, usually less aggressive with squat and bench press. And that's kind of the spectrum of how aggressive we need to be with the taper weeks. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to kind of touch on. Do you have anything you can think of touching on with tapers that we haven't really kind of covered yet? I know this is a pretty brief coverage of the topic, but is there anything you wanted to kind of look at specifically?
I mean, whatever you want to go over. I mean, we could go over like differences in um, certain demographics. Like obviously, if you have a 140 male, probably going to taper them differently than a 52 female.
Yeah, we could do that. I know you coach how much you coach quite a few female athletes, right? Like what percent, what's that roster look like for you? Where is it like 50
Yeah,
almost?
yeah, 50-50 to some maybe skewing female,
Uh-huh.
but pretty 50-50.
Yeah. Um, Obviously the biggest ones probably is you're gonna see less aggressive, uh, I would assume, right? Less aggressive tapers with female athletes than male, and there's probably a big correlation with that with body weight as well. So I don't know if you want to break down a little bit of kind of what goes into that decision making when kind of leading into a meet, if you're more likely, because the way I would think about it, right? If I had, female client, very predictable training, I might maybe not do much of a taper week, if any, if that makes sense. Versus like a 120-kilo male, I'm probably pulling way more out the week of the meet because we could probably handle it because volume and frequency is much lower. So I don't know if you've seen that as well.
For sure. Yeah. So with tapering, I find myself relying on like demographic data less because we probably, if you're peaking someone into a meet, you probably have at least a few blocks behind you where you can kind of base their taper off of their actual training and not have to make these assumptions. But yeah, I mean, I think they do line up with the typical, what you would expect. So with a female lifter, they're probably going to be able to handle more work overall throughout, just their general training. They're more prone to higher frequencies, more prone to higher doses of intensity throughout a week. And I find a lot of the times, like my 3 times a week squatters are pretty much mostly female. And I find that a lot of the times I'm putting like the secondary day or just the higher intensity of the non-primary days before that primary, rather than the tertiary before the primary, just because those short times between those heavier intensities are just necessary for the top end to come in. So that's usually reflected in how I'm running their taper, and that usually is shown by a 2 or 3 day out squat session that they're taking like 85-90% of their 1 rep max for a single or a double or triple. I mean, I just had my client Lindsay compete where she took her best squat is 300. She ended up getting 286 on the platform because she came in pretty flat. But with a taper that has worked before, she's taking like close to 90% for a 3x3, 48 hours before she steps on the platform.
Mhm.
But then when you get into obviously the heavyweight guys, it's like maybe they're hitting one set of squat with like 60% of their 1 rep max like 5 days before they compete, and that's it for the whole week. So yeah, there's definitely these big swings in what people respond well to.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I think you mentioned it, and we should backtrack a little bit, is you don't want to take lifter demographics and just make assumptions based on lifter demographics. You want to, when writing people's training into a meet, you want to take the data you already have, but just typically that is going to line up somewhat with the lifter demographics. What I've seen, I think a lot of it kind of correlates to body weight as well with male versus female, is the lighter guys, you're keeping more workload in generally, keeping more volume in, more intensity in, versus the bigger guys probably opting to pull more out. Like you said, you might just do 1 or 2 sets of squat, on a Tuesday before the meet, and that's it. Versus some people you're squatting, on a Wednesday or Thursday, and you're doing your normal squat workout. So, um, yeah, I completely agree. One point you made, this again, a little bit off topic. You made a point, and I kind of want to talk about this quick, just from my own interests. You said you generally set people's training up where it would go like primary day on, like, we'll just use an example, like a Saturday, tertiary day on a Monday, secondary day on a Wednesday. Is that right? Where you
Say it
normally,
again. Sorry.
so like primary day on a Saturday as an example, one
Mhm.
rest day into a tertiary day, one rest day into a secondary day, and then two rest days into a primary. Did I pick that up right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know about like I have like a set layout that I would defer to for. I think the reason that I would program, let's say take squat for example, the reason that I'm programming a tertiary squat day is usually just because I want to tighten up these gaps,
Hmm.
rather than sometimes it's a case of needing to add more work across the week. We can't fit it anymore into 2 sessions, so we need to add another session so we can get more squat work in. In a case like that, we're probably going to put the lighter of the two sessions before the primary, because it's not like you need that intensity before the primary to be strong. It's just you need more work overall to yield long-term progress.
Hmm.
But if it's a case where we just need to tighten up exposures, then that probably means that the reason that we're switching to the tertiary or to 3 times per week squatting is because that secondary is too far from the primary to begin with, and that secondary is structured to make the primary strong. So we just want to move it a day closer, and then put a day somewhere else in the week to fill that gap, so we're not going so long without squatting. So I find that's usually with like the female or lighter weight lifters is where we're putting that third squat day in, and usually the more like advanced lifters that have kind of run 2 times dry are the people that are going to need that lighter session before the primary, just because we need that workload.
Hmm.
If that made sense.
Yeah. Uh, I currently don't have anyone on my roster 3 times a week now, but I have a good amount of experience. Like at one point, I think I had two or three people running 3 times a week, and I myself have squad 3 times a week in the past. So, um, the way I have usually set it up is like that tertiary day is like 2 days before the primary, and the tertiary day splits the two. Is generally how I've set it up. But I think you mentioned it, where if someone's running twice a week, we need to tighten the gaps up. You can just move the secondary day up a day, put the tertiary day on the back into that behind that secondary day. I mean, I think there's obviously ways to set both up. I personally like to
Mhm.
set the tertiary, you know, if there's 3 days of rest between, from the secondary to primary, I put the tertiary in the middle, and that precedes the primary. So I can make like little adjustments to that day and almost treat it like a primer session. But I think like the other option I would honestly see being really good as well is if someone's using that tertiary day as like, we do need more volume out of that day.
Mhm.
And it's almost like, you know, not even really a low stress day in a sense. Maybe it is like kind of almost another like secondary type stress day. So yeah, a little bit off topic there. I just wanted to ask that.
Yeah.
Um, I think lastly, we talked briefly about weight cuts, and you
Mhm.
said that you usually gut cut people, and I'm the same way, where I usually kind of opt for the gut cut. What do you think the biggest benefits are with the gut cut? And like it for me, right? We're not manipulating water, so we don't have to worry about coming in dehydrated, and we don't have to worry about like the recomp's not as important, right? So those are the first two that come to mind. And it's just very easy to write. It's very easy for an athlete to follow. You don't have to manipulate sodium. It's usually just very easy on the athlete's end. What are like kind of I guess the biggest benefits you see, as well as maybe some cons? Because I do have one con that I think is kind of overlooked.
Sure. I think it's just what you said there. There's just way less variables with a gut cut. Obviously, it's less. I don't know if less effective is the right word. You're not going to lose as much weight. There's obviously a much higher ceiling to the amount of weight that you can lose with a water cut than a gut cut. But it's a lot easier to write, like you said. Like it's just kind of a template, right? You just kind of plug in someone's calories, and there's your gut cut. Whereas with a water cut, it's like you need to know how they're going to respond to that water load, and when you need to pull out sodium, and how much. First of all, you need to know how much sodium someone's taking in a day, which a lot of
In
people just don't
water
know that.
too. Some
Yeah,
people
and
drink a
water.
lot of water, so you have to pull, their water load might be way more, and someone else's water load might be like very little water in comparison to, what they probably should be drinking if they're not drinking very much water.
Yeah. So typically, I think it's a lot easier to sit within 2.5% of your class, and then you know just do a gut cut, 3 day gut cut, and it's pretty predictable to where we more or less know exactly how you're gonna come in, as long as we have an accurate calorie count. There's not really going to be any kind of decrease in performance. And you really only want to use water cuts when it's like absolutely necessary. And if we're sitting like a little bit over what gut cut, you know, distance would be, I would rather just kind of like get to gut cut distance than to do a water cut.
Yeah, I'm the same. I hate big cuts. I'll have people and I'm just like begging and pleading them to get within range of the weight class. Like,
Yeah.
dude, can you please get like, you know, 2.5, maybe 3%, like 5 pounds or whatever the case is, so we can gut cut because you're 10 pounds over right now. Like, we're not gonna make weight. So
Yeah,
I
and if you're winning worlds or you're winning nationals, then go ahead. I mean, you
yeah.
need to if you need to sit at this training weight in order to be competitive in this weight class, then yeah, that's what you need to do if you want to win. But um, you know, if you're placing fourth at a local meet and it's like it's just there's just no point. There's really no point. Either go up a weight class or sit lighter.
Mhm.
There's no point to do a water cut and just cause that extra stress.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like what you said with if you're competing at Worlds, right? You probably are at a point where you understand that maybe having like the perfect meet day or hitting what you hit in a meet and hitting what you do in the gym on meet day, probably not going to happen with a big cut, but you probably can accept that knowing that you're competitive in a world's class or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think most people just generally with what people's goals are, they want to hit close to, if not more on the platform than they do in the gym. And having a very predictable and small cut, doing it, not really manipulating water much is probably your best bet. I think the one con I see of gut cuts that's no one talks about that at least I've seen with my roster, people hate them. Like people do not like to do them. I actually have someone in September who um like we're gonna water cut because he just was like, I'm not gut cutting again, dude. This sucks. So
Really?
yeah, they just don't like the eating, makes them feel sick. I've never done a gut cut myself, so I don't know. But I've had like two or three people now be like, yeah, dude, this makes me feel terrible. Like I feel so sick or whatever. But I also had the caveat is I had another athlete, or the opposite, I guess, is I had another athlete loved it. Like when I told him like,
Mhm.
hey, here's what you're gonna be eating, he was like super excited. He was like, dude, I cannot wait. I've been eating like chicken and rice all day for
Yeah.
months and months. So I think that's something to look into also. But again, with those people who like don't enjoy it, like, we're gonna do a small water cut anyways. We're only gonna cut 2.5, 3%. And it's not like we're cutting a ton anyway, so it shouldn't be too big of a deal. But
Yeah.
I don't know if
It's
you
always funny when you tell people the gut cut protocol for the first time, they have no idea what it is. They're like, "Oh, I'm eating candy for 3
yeah.
days, and that's gonna make me lose weight." It's like, "Yeah, man."
I had to explain it to someone like multiple times, like how, like, why is this working? Like, how is this actually making your weight go down? They're like, how's my weight gonna go down? Like, I'm eating, Reese's peanut butter cups. Like, how's my weight gonna
Mhm.
go down? Like, dude, like it'll go down. Here's, we're manipulating your the weight in your gut and whatever. I had someone's mom was worried about it, I think too. Like she was a
Okay.
little bit concerned. And I was like, dude, you'll be all right. Like, you'll be fine. Like you might not feel your stomach might hurt, but you'll be all right, dude.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it was. It was his mom or something. But yeah, um, I guess that was the last thing I wanted to talk about. We kind of covered the biggest things was, programming for momentum, programming then kind of into meets and how peaking blocks might be a little bit of like an overrated term, I guess, or maybe thrown around too much sometimes.
Mhm.
Talked on tapering, talked on um cutting into a meet briefly, and then we did kind of get on a tangent about the third squat. I think that was everything, right?
Yeah, yeah, unless you have anything else you wanna go over.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. I appreciate you coming on. I want to do an episode where I get all three of the TSP guys. I think that'd be
Hell
a good,
yeah, for sure.
get all of you guys. I don't know what we would talk about, but figure out a good topic, kind of get going on that. But yeah, that would be a fun one to do is get all three of you on. Um, but yeah, I definitely want each individual, uh, all you guys individually as well. So appreciate you coming on, and that'll do it for this episode.
Absolutely, I appreciate you having me.
Yep.